Split Second is next up on the chopping block. Directed by Russell Mulcahy, written by Richard Christian Matheson, and shot by Rick Boda. Based on a story from Shock Suspense Stories number 4. You're about to find out why being a hateful human doesn't hack it in the crypt. Liz has grown tired of being a cabaret singer in a lumberjack town, having to fight off all the grabby hands. In the show, she is a poor girl down on her luck, waiting tables, trying to save for a bus ticket out of town. She also has problems with lumberjacks who don't know how to take no for an answer. Until Steve Dixon steps in. Steve is the owner of the lumber camp. He has money and will take care of Liz. So when he asks her to marry him, she doesn't hesitate to say yes. Steve doesn't allow any other women in the camp, and if anyone even looks at Liz the wrong way, he'll get him back in line. Anything Liz wants, she gets. What is there for her to worry about? Steve rules over his workers with an iron fist, and her. He doesn't want her around the other men. And when his men ask if any of them can bring their wives into the camp, Steve proclaims he makes the rules, so the rules do not apply to him. When one of the lumberjacks makes a crack about Liz's past, Steve gets violent. This gets the message across. Treat Steve's wife with respect. Meanwhile, Liz has become bored with Steve's possessive behavior. Her presence causes a stir amongst the workers. They all start avoiding her. Fine by her, but the longer Liz stays in the camp, the more she hates it. Then one day, Ted walks in, looking for a job. Unlike Steve, this newbie is young and handsome. Steve wants to see how the kid is with an axe. The show is a little more up-to-date, using chainsaws instead of axes. But Ted is a little old-fashioned, as he says.
Let's see what you can do. I'm afraid I don't care for those, sir.
How else you plan to cut these things down, son?
Guess I'm a little bit old-fashioned.
Well, that's what you want to do.
Say the word.
Go.
He chops up a log in no time. His skills even catch the attention of all the lumberjacks, as well as Liz. All this admiration being given to Ted doesn't sit right with Steve. He sends everyone back to work. Ted gets the job, as long as he remembers who's boss. Ted is popular with the workers, who can't wait to have him on their side in this year's log chopping tournament. Liz is warming up to Ted as well. He's the only reason she's still sticking around. Too bad for him, or her, Ted doesn't understand her advances. The other lumberjacks warn Ted to stay away from Liz, or beware of her husband's wrath. Steve is getting worse as he cracks down on their off-hours activities, like practicing for the logging contest. Liz finds Ted practicing alone in the woods. She comes on to him strongly, and he fears if Steven will find out, but she won't tell if he doesn't. The show's Liz takes a more steamy approach towards Ted.
Mrs. Dixon?
I'm in here, Ted.
Mrs. Dixon? Oh God, I'm sorry.
I can't reach the town, Ted. Please.
In his haste to get out of there, he leaves one of his gloves behind. Steve finds it and demands to know who's been sleeping with his wife. His workers try to talk some sense into him, and Ted decides it's time to skip town. Liz doesn't give up. She wants Ted, and Ted finally gives in. The comics, Ted outright turns her down. Nobody rejects Liz. She calls for Steve, who comes running. The show, Steve catches the two of them in the act. When he sees Ted with his wife, he beats him to a bloody pulp, especially when Liz claims that Ted forced her. The comic offers Ted some mercy as the other lumberjacks show up and pull Steve off of him. Ted wakes up unable to see. He's blind. Liz stays away from the men for the next couple weeks. Ted is disappointed that he'll no longer be any good for the log chopping competition. But the men have his back. They teach him how to chop, even without the use of his eyes. In the show, he'll have to get used to using a chainsaw instead of his trusty axe. Liz takes a peek at Ted's progress, and his aim is terrible. The other men are clearly cheering him on to make him feel better about himself. On the night before the contest, the Lumberjacks want Steve to be present for Ted's final practice session. Steve tells him to go away. He has no interest in such a thing. But the knife held up to his neck changes his mind. Ted is on top of his practice log, swinging away with his axe. Except there's something different about the log. It's hollowed out, with Steve bound and gagged inside. And Liz is next. The show takes things to an even more sadistic extreme. As Ted saws through 2 trees, we see blood spraying out, allowing us to put the pieces together ourselves before the big reveal. To add insult to injury, they even topple over the Steve slices, and have a good time doing it. Poor Liz awaits her turn. And Tales from the Crypt producer Joel Silver has a place in line as well. Split Second shows what happens when good, honest, hard-working people say no more to a cruel leadership. Brian James as Steve is an unhinged sadist, with no shame showcasing his power trip for all to see. If you're like me and have been trying to place where you've seen this actor before, how's this work for you?
Wake up! Time to die.
Michelle Johnson as Liz may have had our sympathy at the start, but it doesn't take long for us to see her true, manipulative colors. The comics Ted never gave into temptation, adding to the innocence trampled by Steve and Liz. But even though Ted may not have been able to ultimately resist her in the show, I don't think that deters us from feeling good for him when he gets behind the chainsaw. Of course, these characters didn't write themselves. Jack Kamen's art doesn't skimp on Steve's rage or Liz's two-faced nature. It's no wonder screenwriter Richard Christian Matheson didn't have to stray far from the original story for this adaptation. It's easy to see why this timbered tale is all the buzz.
Hey guys, I'm getting pretty good at this.